I didn't just, we lost our houses, our cars, our furniture. I moved very far away. I lost my children. I lost all of my children in at least some fashion.
And then literally months later, he was arrested. And during those 8 years, because for all of us that know about pornography, it's very progressive. And my husband went from pornography to affairs. One lasted for about 1.5 years, and he fell in love with her. And she moved from a big city to where we were, unbeknownst to me. Then it became one-nighters. Then it became homosexuality, and then the downloading of child pornography. And that's why he was arrested, because his work discovered the child pornography on his laptop. And so on his way home from a trip, he was arrested at a public airport. And that's how I found out.
And so therefore I walked out of that room that day just thinking it was all me, that we actually went there because, I was at the stage where I didn't even know if I was hearing from God right. There was just so many different voices coming from different, friends and elders and leaders of the church, that that's why we went to the pastor getting guidance. And so instead of support on my side, and also for my fiance as well, it ended up being very, very crushing. Like I walked out of there and I was absolutely devastated, because then it was no longer my fiance's problem with sex addiction. It was actually my problem.
I remember just becoming very despondent and hopeless, and a lot of lonely nights and crying, but I didn't tell anyone because I was a people pleaser. I didn't want anyone to think bad about my husband. I didn't tell my family. You just keep doing what you're supposed to be doing. But we were drifting further and further apart. And about 6 years into the marriage, we had reached like a crisis point where I just knew something was going on. And I remember asking him one time, "Have you been unfaithful to me?" I just pinned him down, and he said, "Well, yes, once or twice, but it was only with prostitutes." And I remember the big relief. "Oh, it's only with prostitutes. That's a good thing."
And the way that it came out is that the daughter that stayed at home, she was 18 at the time, and her brothers were 15 and 13. She realized that she'd be going away to college, and she didn't want it to happen to her sister, so she started to tell some of the older siblings. But then when it came out, we found out that he had already been molesting her younger sister. So that was how it all came out, and the state stepped in pretty quickly and took the three youngest children and placed them with my husband's family, who decided that I was equally to blame, and I was really never allowed to see them or talk to them again. really from that minute that I got that call, I started to just unravel. Everything from my childhood triggered in, and then within a few hours, he had made a confession to the police, and he called me and said, I made this confession, and I said, what did you do? And he said, the girls. And I said, what girls? And he named the two younger girls, and it was like my head just blew up. I couldn't believe it. I'm not even sure what I did next for the next few weeks. It's just, I just remembered like the craziness of it and thinking, how could this be happening? This can't be happening. This can't be real.
There was one particular couple that we were more or less encouraged to go and see, and they were supporting us to some degree, but not really. During that time, they were sort of diagnosing me with having a dissociative identity disorder during that time, and so therefore it wasn't just that I was dealing with, you know, my husband having a sexual addiction. I also had this, you know, these other words spoken over to me, and I had this other problem which I had no idea. Also, so for me, that I just went into this downward spiral. It was horrible, and so I went and saw a psychologist as well to see whether or not I did have it, and the psychologist said, no, Amanda, you don't. Everyone has some form of dissociation due to trauma from the past, and that's all you're dealing with. Things are being triggered from your past marriage, and that's why, to some extent, you're just going through the symptoms of trauma.
And then I remember the day when the notice for child support came in the mail. And I argued with the lady at the county, said, no, we don't have another child born on this day. And she said she'd check it out, and I hung up, and it's like the light bulb went on, and I asked him, I said, did you father a child in those early years? And he said, no. And you know, for the first time I had some anger rise up in me, and I said, well, you know what, I'm going to find out if this is truth, and if it is, you better tell me. And he confessed, yes, he had fathered a child, and that was the reason we had to sell our home and move way back when, and why we could never go back and have dinner in that town.
I sat in my kitchen with the two officers. One was a male and the other one was a female. Still remember his name. And I would say the first half hour, 45 minutes, they treated me very harshly. They were actually quite cruel. And I think as they were sharing with me, I started to go into incredible shock. My body was shaking. And I remember having to tell them a few times, okay, I need you to stop. And then I would stand up and I would just pace, and I just remember praying to God, Lord, you got to do something right now, because I need to wake up. I need to wake up from this nightmare. Whatever has happened to me, you've got to wake me up. And then I'd sit down again and they'd share more.
I felt like I was in a straitjacket. And I couldn't leave. How can I leave? I can't support my kids on my own. Where could I go? And it just was like that for several years, maybe 3 years, where I just felt so trapped and so hopeless and so with nowhere. I felt like there was nowhere to turn.
The discoveries kept trickling out year after year after year. There were so many tears, so much loneliness, so much hopelessness for me. And yet I would pound on God's chest and I'd say, you know, what am I going to do? Who can I tell this to? I can't tell anyone because I don't want them to think bad of my husband. And, you know, I'd read all the books, The Power of a Praying Wife. Oh my gosh, I devoured everything I could get. And it said, you know, my sole purpose in life was to see that my husband was successful. This is my ministry. It's my husband. And I'm giving it all I got, God, but it's not working. And I felt so hopeless, so worthless that I could not fix this marriage. And I was just despondent of what to do. So I did sink into depression a lot. Then the day came when my granddaughter found him setting up a rendezvous at our home when she was spending the night with a prostitute, and she was devastated. She looked up to her grandpa so much. She was 16 years old at the time, and this just rocked her world. She didn't know who to tell or what to do, and so she told her mom, who confronted me, and gosh, my story's really out now. My daughter knows. She never knew. My granddaughter knows. And my daughter came to me and said, Mom, Dad needs to be off the property. I thought, well, how bad is that when your daughter has to teach you how to have boundaries? Another lie, another secrecy. You've gone off, and I just hit my wall, and I cried for days. I could not stop, and I finally, for the first time, decided I needed help. I can't. Me and God is not cutting it. I need somebody to talk to. So I went online and found a counselor, a local counselor. And I called her, and I went in there, and I started pouring out my heart. And but yet, the strange thing was, when I was telling her, the whole time I would back up when I was telling her all the horrific things that my husband had done. I would back up and say, but he's really a good guy. I don't want you to think that he's all bad, because he does all these good things too. And I was trying to paint the full picture. And she just sat there with her mouth hanging open, and she said to me, you have been a faithful wife for 35 years and you don't have to do it anymore. I was like dumbfounded. I said, yes, yeah, I do. You don't get it. I'm a Christian. I have to. God hates divorce. I don't have any choice. And she said, no, God hates a lot of things. He hates a hard heart. He hates lying lips. He hates feet that run to evil. He hates a lot of things, Vonda. And he hates what has happened to you. You do have choices. And I just sat there dumbfounded. It was like somebody had opened the cage door for the first time, and let me free. Mind you, all this time he claimed he was in recovery. He was, a master at manipulation. He went to the 12-step groups. He had a counselor. He was making it look good on the outside, telling me how he'd do anything to have me back. But his actions and his words just weren't lining up. And I finally had to get out of the fantasy world that somehow I had control over healing this marriage. So he moved out, and through the course of the next couple years, that was 4 years ago, he continued to pursue his addiction, only now he was free to do it without somebody breathing down his shoulder, and he just went full bore into it, to the point he was caught. We worked together in a business, and he was caught several times with pornography on the computer, and he left his computer up one day with his email that he was meeting, it was 10 o'clock in the morning, and a couple of my kids work with me, and I said, "Where did Dad go?" And they said, "Well, I don't know." I said, "He's going out to a gun shop." And I looked at his computer, and he'd set up a rendezvous with a prostitute. And I finally got enough courage to say, that is it. I felt like I finally got the pass from God that said, it is done. And I went down and filed for divorce. So hard on putting up this beautiful front. I mean, we had the perfect family, the big house, the 4th of July parties where everyone came. We had a young couples group in our house. My husband was a deacon for years. I taught Sunday school. I mean, we looked like we had it all together, and I lived in that fantasy. I lived in that fantasy because if I could pretend that it is what it looks like, then I would be okay. I would just bury the pain and keep going forward, and then God and I would have the victory. But I did not have control. I finally learned I do not have control over another human being, and I learned that by my forgiving my husband over and over and over again, I was actually driving him further and further into his addiction with no consequences. In James Dobson's book, Love Must Be Tough, he talks about that the loving spouse who enables the addicted husband is actually, driving the stake in the coffin. I did not know how to have boundaries. I did not know. And when I started through my recovery having boundaries, he resisted them like he'd never seen such a thing. And I'd never had them. I never got angry. I never had boundaries. There were never consequences. I took the consequences within myself. So I'm on a whole new journey to learn that it is God's glory to protect ourselves. That He has given us charge of this little girl inside, and we do Him a disservice when we let other people abuse us, take advantage of us, and emotionally destroy us. That wasn't His plan for His little girls.
when this really happened, I really thought that God had judged me and found me wanting and that God had abandoned me. And I was like that for months.
I would go in the woods and I would so yell at God. The words that would come out of my mouth were not pretty, especially for a pastor's wife. Not pretty at all. But you know what? Nobody was there. It was just God and me, and God knew how I was feeling. He knew. And I had a lot of anger issues. And to be perfectly honest, and again, it is who God created me to be, but I mourned. I'm not sure what I mourned more, Lisa, the loss of my ministry. And to me, my ministry was stolen from me because of my husband's addiction. So I had a lot of anger with the fact that I so invested years and years and years into my church, gone.
I really doubted my own relationship with God. Like I really doubted hearing the Holy Spirit. And so therefore, over time, I started to get really angry at myself, which then therefore, because I got angry at myself because I didn't listen, I then started to get angry at God that I was actually in this position, that I'd made a decision to marry a man that, had a sexual addiction. And then I got to the point where, well, God, you know what? Like, I feel like you don't care about me anymore because I'm crying out that, my husband would change, that he would start to be transparent, that he would actually make the steps of being accountable. So I was asking God all of this stuff all along, and I just felt like he wasn't there, he wasn't listening. And so I remember one particular night, and it was a horrific time, and my husband ended up going for a walk because we got into a bit of an argument. And when we went for the walk, when he went for the walk, I didn't know, but he was actually, peeping through another woman's window that had her blinds open and was watching her get undressed. And when he came back, I could just feel something yet again. And so, I ended up getting extremely upset because I could feel that something had happened. And it took, quite a few hours for him to actually confess that, yes, he actually was, looking at someone, and that he couldn't stop doing things like that because he just enjoyed it. And so for me, I just remember after, crying and screaming and, being so upset that he would deceive me like that. I remember crying out to God and just saying, you know what, God, I've just had enough. I'm just so sick of it. I don't want anything to do with you anymore. I don't want anything to do with you, Father, Holy Spirit, or Jesus. I've had enough.
I had to call our assistant up to the house. And he was, of course, in shock. And I remember there I am trying to be the professional pastor's wife and sharing what had just literally happened an hour before, with my house still a mess, my two boys in total shock, and knowing I had to tell my two older kids who weren't living at the house at the time. And I remember the poor pastor kept saying, "How could your husband do this to me? I'm retired. I don't want to take over the church." And I remember probably for the first time feeling so angry that I was feeling very invisible, that this was about him. And I think it was a good lesson for me, because in the 11 years I've been walking this, I hear this a lot, that we as wives can go through such trauma, but it's not about us. It's about our husbands. It's about what others are feeling. And we become the invisible, person who is carrying the burden of keeping the family together and trying to minimize the consequences of everybody, especially those of us in ministry, protecting the church.
But I really just didn't want to go to church for, one reason was the judgment, and the other reason was because I was traumatized all the time, and because I just wasn't getting the support that I needed. All I needed was someone to sit beside me and say, "I love you, and I care about you, and you're validated." But I never had that, and that's when I actually separated myself and actually searched, on the internet for help. I searched, to so many different websites, just looking for some form of help and just someone who actually understood. I was just yearning for someone to say, "I understand what you're going through, Amanda, and you're not alone." And I didn't find that in the church that I was in.
And ironically, a few days later, I was called back to my assistant pastor's home, and they both asked me to not come to church anymore, because the church loved me and they needed to establish themselves as leaders. And so now I didn't just lose my marriage as I knew it. I wasn't sure if my kids were going to survive this, honestly. And I didn't even know if my job working at a public school, right, I was going to have a job. And so forget about finances. And then I didn't even now have my own spiritual family. I had no support. And we had to move because we couldn't afford our home anymore, because my husband lost his job and he was in prison. And anyways, it was just a very, very lonely journey that I went through. and we have a hierarchy in the church, and there is spiritual abuse on women. And I'm saying this and I'm in tears. My heart hurts right now. Because I really do believe that it grieves God's heart. I so believe it. And it is shocking. And I'll just use me as an example. The things that pastors have said to me over the course of this healing, that, we women are frigid, that if we would just wear sexier lingerie, that if we would, have showers with our husbands so that they wouldn't act out. It is horrific.
And so what I've had to do, honestly, is just say, I don't care what people think. I am the only one that has to answer for what I do, and I'm going to do whatever I can to please God. Even when it's hard, even when it doesn't make sense, even if everybody ends up hating me, but they don't. I have more friends now than I've ever had. I've been able to renew friendships from a long time ago, people that have said, I'm sorry, I didn't really get what you were going through, and I really didn't know what to say. And other people that said, oh, I just prayed for you all the time, but I couldn't really, I didn't know how to help you.
God never once condemned me. He just, put his arms around me and he just loved on me. Even when I was so angry, I felt his arms just loving on me. I think he was rejoicing because I was finally getting it out there, because he could see the damage it was doing inside of me, right? And he was just glad that I was getting it out there, because it allowed him the opportunity to go in and do a healing work. And that's what I want for the women.
My sense of worth started to restore. God started to start telling me, not telling me, but well, it was telling me, but also reassuring me who I am in Him. That I am worthy to be loved, that I am, worth being pursued, that I am a delight. That I'm a beautiful daughter of His. And so, hearing all those words of affirmation from Him, all it's done is just build me up. And knowing, what, even if I never meet anyone again, if I never marry again, I have the affirmation and the love from my Heavenly Daddy, and He is just, He's so wonderful and so kind, and that is what has brought me out, nothing else.
To live the addicted life would be horrible. To live as the spouse of an addict is a nightmare. But God is good. He sustains us. If we keep our eyes on Him, we keep hoping, we put one foot in front of the other day after day. And Marcia told me this early on, and I didn't know I would have. She said when I first started talking to her, Fonda, I do have joy again. There will always be the pain. Those scars will never go away. But she said, I have joy again. And I couldn't imagine that. But I can still remember where I was standing on the stairs one day, catching myself laughing and going, wow, there it is. There it is. I have a smile again. It took a long time to get there. And now, there are more good days than bad days. So I just encourage everybody on their journey to be hopeful that God has a plan for you, but it does require you to stand up, to embrace boundaries, to not turn a blind eye at sin. Sin grows in the darkness. We need to bring the light into it and say we will not live with it. There are boundaries, and it is our duty to draw those around ourselves and protect ourselves.
It wasn't long after I was married to my husband that I was just praying to God, and I was praying in the Spirit of God, and next minute I could actually hear these cries from these women in this nation of Australia. I could literally hear them, and I could actually hear their hearts. I could hear the desperation. I could hear the pain. I could hear the isolation coming from their hearts. And I wept, and I could not stop weeping. And I remember, saying to God, whatever you want me to do, I will do. And so, tomorrow I'm meeting up with a beautiful lady that she runs a beautiful ministry called City Women, which helps so many different ministries within our town, but also especially in the outer regions of Queensland as well. And so I'm going to be talking to her tomorrow about maybe facilitating a group or running a group where there's actually support for women here in Australia that are wives of sex addicts or partners of sex addicts,